Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tale, where secrets slip, lies unravel, and the truth always has a twist. Real stories, raw confessions, and shocking betrayals. Drop a comment if you've ever caught a red flag too late now. Let's get into today's tale. My sister planned her wedding on my graduation day from med school. She sneered, "We all know you barely passed." Anyway, my mom clapped and said, "She'll be a wife, you're just a woman in scrubs." And I looked around and said, "Thanks for reminding me who you are." And then on the day of the ceremony for most of my life, my mother made it clear that my worth was tied to how well I could play the role of a proper woman, meaning marriage, beauty, and babies. My sister Jasmine fit that mold perfectly. She was always the one. Praised, adored, displayed like a prize at every family gathering. On the other hand was the one with potential. The one they said was book smart, as if it were a consolation. Prize for being less than everything else. Jasmine and I have never been close. There was no defining fight, no moment of betrayal that split us. It was more like a slow erosion. She always looked at me like I was something to be tolerated. I never expected support from her. But what she did 6 weeks before the most important day of my life wasn't just inconsiderate. It was strategic. She called to tell me she'd finally set her wedding date. June 3rd. I knew she knew that was my med school graduation day. I told her, "So, can't you just skip it?" She said, "I mean, it's just a ceremony, right? You already passed." I reminded her that it wasn't just a formality. It was the culmination of years of sacrifice. Years of working nights at the university library, barely scraping by with scholarships and student loans. Years of rotating through hospitals on 2 hours of sleep, while she flitted from brunches to parties, always the center of attention. She laughed a short, clipped, dismissive sound. "We all know you. Barely passed anyway." That moment still echoes in my head sometimes, especially when I'm lying awake, trying to find peace in a life I had to rebuild from the ground up. When I told my parents, they didn't even flinch. My mother, who had barely ever said she was proud of me, clapped her hands like someone had announced a royal engagement. "She'll be a wife," she said. "You're just a woman in scrubs." I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I looked around at their faces. My family and I said, "Thanks for reminding me who you are." That was the last time I went back to that house. I didn't go to Desire's wedding. I went to my graduation the morning of June 3rd. The sky over Lexington was a perfect Kentucky blue. The sun cast long golden shadows on the campus lawn, and the ceremony began with bagpipes, something I used to think was a bit too ceremonial. But that day, it made me tear up. Not because of the pump, but because I had made it alone in my pocket. I kept a screenshot of the text my mother sent the night before. "We're sorry you can't come. We'll send pictures. Hope it's not too awkward standing there alone." But I wasn't alone. My best friend Harini was in the front row. My clinical mentor, Dr. Rafael Torres, had taken time out of his schedule to be there. Even 2 of my patients' families had sent cards. One of them said, "Thank you for being the first person to treat my mother with dignity in that hospital." I carried that card in my hand like armor. Desire's wedding was held that same afternoon at a winery just outside town. My cousins kept texting me updates out of sheer secondhand embarrassment. Apparently guests had started whispering, "Wait, wasn't her sister graduating med school today?" Some even left early to attend the evening celebration Maya had thrown for me at a rooftop bar downtown. That's the thing about family. They may dismiss your accomplishments behind closed doors, but the world has a way of seeing truth when it's put in the light. Maya pulled me aside that night at the party. She said, "I know this wasn't the day you dreamed of, but maybe it's the day you needed." I nodded. I felt that too. This day had stripped away every illusion I had about who was really in my corner. And honestly, it felt cleaner, like starting from scratch. 2 days later, my mother left me a voicemail. Her voice, brittle and sharp, said, "You humiliated us." I didn't respond. There was no need. She had done that herself. But what truly changed, everything came the next week. I received an email from a residency coordinator in Seattle. One of my long-shot applications. They'd seen the photo I'd posted online. From graduation, me in my white coat standing next to Maya and Dr. Torres beaming like the sun had never looked brighter. The caption read, Some families break you, others help you rebuild proud to have found mine. Apparently, it had made the rounds. Someone on the selection committee said they admired my resilience. I was offered a spot in their internal medicine program. I didn't tell anyone in my family. I just packed my things and left. I drove across the country with a Maya riding shotgun we played, old 9 songs, and stopped at gas stations and towns. We couldn't pronounce when we finally got to Seattle. The air felt different, colder yes, but clearer. Like something I'd been missing had finally found its way back into my lungs. Now my days are filled with charting patient rounds and learning from doctors who believe medicine is more than just numbers. It's empathy. My nights are quiets, save for the occasional call from Harini, who now lives 2 blocks away. Jasmine did reach out once, just a short message. I didn't mean to ruin your day. I was just trying to live mine. I haven't responded, not out of spite, but because I don't owe her that anymore. And that silence, it's the most peaceful sound I've ever known. It's been nearly 6 months since the wedding and graduation. At first I thought the silence from my family would feel like a weight, like something missing. But it didn't. What I felt instead was an odd lightness. No more unsolicited comparisons to Jasmine. No more guilt-tripping texts from my mother dripping in passive aggression. No more Sunday calls where I had to contort myself into someone softer, quieter, more appropriate. Instead, I found myself waking up with a strange kind of freedom at work. I began to settle in. My attending doctor, Gwen. A sharp, quietly brilliant physician started assigning memo responsibility. You don't panic. She told me once that's rare. Especially for interns, I told her I didn't have the luxury of panic anymore. She nodded like she understood Seattle itself, started to feel like home. In small ways, the barista at the coffee shop down the block learned my name. The corner bookstore owner started setting aside medical memoirs for me. I even adopted a senior cat from a shelter, gray and cranky with one eye. I named him Cosmo. But family has a way of creeping in, even when you think you've sealed all the doors. It started with a Facebook post. Someone had tagged me in an old photo from college. I was in a lab coat, standing awkwardly, next to a group of classmates. During our first anatomy class, the caption was generic. Something like throwback to when we were still terrified of cadavers. It got a few comments. One of them from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in over a year, just said, "Is this the same Rowan who skipped her own sister's wedding?" I didn't reply, but I knew it had started within days. I got a message request on Instagram from my aunt, my mother's sister. She wrote, "Rowan, I don't want to meddle, but your mom's been really hurt. I know things got messy, but family's family, maybe you could reach out, life's too short." That line, life's too short. People love pulling that out when they want you to forget the cost of staying silent. I didn't block her. I didn't reply either. A week later, Jasmine posted a photo on Instagram. Her wedding portrait, framed in gold now, hangs above a mantle. In the caption she wrote, "Married the love of my life while my own sister refused to attend, but we move on with grace." Some people are too broken to celebrate others. That part got me. Too broken to celebrate others. She wanted me to look like the bitter one, the jealous sister, the cold-hearted woman in scrubs who couldn't handle someone else's joy. I felt my hands tremble, not with rage, but something deeper. A sadness, maybe, or disappointment that even after everything she couldn't just let it be. I didn't want revenge. I didn't need revenge. I just wanted peace. But the world has a way of giving you opportunities, even when you're not seeking them. 2 months after the Instagram post, I got an invitation in the mail. Not from my family, from the hospital. The University of Kentucky was holding a donor appreciation gala, and some recent alumni had been invited back as guest physicians to speak about their experiences. Postgrad. Apparently, someone at my old program had nominated me. It was the first time in months that I thought seriously about going back. I debated it 4 weeks. What would it mean to go back? Would it be a statement, a confrontation, a validation? And he told me, "Go if it's for you." don't go if it's to prove anything to them. She was right, and after a lot of quiet walks and journaling and staring up at Cosmo's disapproving cat face, I booked the flight I didn't tell anyone. When I arrived in Lexington, I stayed in a hotel, downtown, familiar streets, familiar trees, but it felt like visiting a place I'd once lived in. A dream. I drove past my childhood home but didn't slow down. The gala was held at a converted horse barn on the edge of town, surrounded by rolling pastures and aging oak trees. The same kind of venue Jasmine had chosen for her wedding. Ironically, I walked in alone, wearing a simple black dress, no fanfare, no entrance. I wasn't trying to be dramatic. I was just there to speak for 15 minutes about my residency experience and the impact of donor scholarships. That's all but word spreads by the time I reached the reception area. I'd already seen 2 familiar faces from my old neighborhood. I nodded politely. One of them whispered to the other, thinking I couldn't hear. "Isn't that Desire's sister? The doctor?" Desire's name, Desire's name, Desire was still the first association, but this time I wasn't reduced by it. It just floated past me like fog. I was seated near the front. My name was listed on the program, Dr. Rowan Santana, class of 2025. University of Kentucky College of Medicine. I took a deep breath. The words felt weighty, real. I hadn't just survived. I had become. The speech went well. Better than I expected. People clapped some. Stood afterwards. A few attendees approached me. Retired doctors, local philanthropists. A woman who remembered me shadowing at the children's clinic back in undergrad. They all asked about Seattle, about the work, about what I planned next. And then as I stood sipping sparkling water by the back doors, I heard her voice. "Jasmine?" I turned slowly. She looked the same perfect makeup designer heels, but her eyes flickered. When she saw me, she hadn't expected me to be there. She crossed her arms, her smile tight. "I didn't think you'd come back." I tilted my head. I wasn't planning to, but the invitation was for me. She laughed, soft and bitter. "Still doing the whole martyr thing, huh?" "No," I said, "just living." She looked me up and down. "Is it living if you have no family?" And for the first time in a long time, I felt no sting in that question. Just calm. "I have family," I said, "just not here." She opened her mouth to reply, but then someone called my name. A former professor waved from across the room. I turned, walked away, and for the first time I didn't look back. I didn't expect to run into my mother that night. I had convinced myself she wouldn't be there. The gala wasn't their kind of event, too academic, too formal. Not enough flash, but as I was finishing a conversation with one of the hospital donors near the bar, I heard her laugh. Not loud, but unmistakable that. Same laugh that used to fill our living room during Sunday dinners, back when I still believed we were a normal family. I turned slightly, and there she was. Esther in a pale blue dress, perfectly coy. As always, she was speaking to someone I didn't recognize. It looked like she was explaining something, gesturing in the air with the same hand movements she used whenever she was justifying something distasteful. Her eyes found me mid-sentence. She paused, lips parted. Just a little. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. She broke eye contact first. A few minutes later, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I knew it would be her before I even turned. "Rowan." I looked at her calmly. "Mom." She hesitated, then said, "You look different." "I am." Silence. Thick and sticky like wet wool. She pressed her lips together, then added, "You should have told us you were coming." "We could have." "Why?" I asked, voice even. She blinked. "Well, because we're family." I nodded, slowly. "You're right. And when I told you the date of my graduation, I thought family would matter then too." She flinched just slightly. "Rowan, we didn't mean—" "Yes, you diddy." Interrupted. "You did mean it. You made a choice." She straightened her posture like she was squaring up for a debate. Jasmine didn't pick the date to hurt you. She picked it, knowing it would. Are you really going to hold that over her forever? She snapped, voice low, but Sharpie stayed quiet for a beat. Then I said, "You know, what really hurts, Mom, it's not that you all chose to celebrate her on a day that mattered to me. It's that you didn't even see it as a choice." She opened her mouth, but I wasn't done. "You told me I was just a woman in scrubs. And for a long time I believed you. I thought if I wasn't married or beautiful enough or likable enough, I was less than. But I'm not, I'm whole. I made it without anyone." Here, cheering me on, a flash of something crossed her face. No regret. Not yet. Maybe discomfort, maybe realization. "You know," I added, "people used to tell me that family is everything. I think they meant that a supportive family is everything. The rest is just noise." She didn't follow me when I turned to walk away. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations, laughter, and quiet validation. I ran into my old anatomy lab partner who was now doing a fellowship in cardiology in Chicago. We reminisced about the time we both cried in the supply closet after failing our first clinical skills exam. It was strange how far away that moment felt now, like another life. Later that night, back in my hotel room, I took off my heels and stood, barefoot by the window, staring at the Lexington ski line. It was smaller than I remembered, like the city had shrunk a little, without the weight of expectations pressing down on me. My phone buzzed, a text from Maya. "Did you survive the Lexington Gala circus?" I smiled and typed back, "Just barely wish he'd been here to watch the act." Then I turned off the lamp and let the darkness settle in. Sleep didn't come quickly, but when it did, it was the first time in a long while I didn't dream about being left behind. The next morning, I woke up to a missed call. It was from an unfamiliar number with a Lexington area code. I stared at it for a few seconds, then put the phone down and got in the shower. I didn't have it in me to entertain another conversation from someone who had only recently realized I had value by the time I got dressed and made my way downstairs to the hotel lobby. I had 3 new texts. One was from the same number, Jasmine. "Can we talk before you leave? It won't be dramatic, I promise." Another was from my cousin Talia, the only one I used to feel genuinely close to. "Talia saw you at the gala. You looked incredible. I'm proud of you." And a third, unexpectedly, was from my father, Dad. "I'm sorry for not saying anything when I should have. If you have time before you fly out, I'd like to see you." That one gave me pause. My dad had always been in the background, a quiet presence who never stood up to my mother or intervened between me and Jasmine, but he wasn't cruel, just absent in the ways I needed him most. I replied to Talia first, short, but warm, "Me thanks, Lex, means a lot." Then I messaged my dad. "Me, okay. Have a couple hours before my flight coffee." He suggested a small diner, just off Harrodsburg Road. We used to go there when I was little. It had peeling red booze and those plastic syrup dispensers that never stopped being sticky, no matter how many times they were wiped down. When I walked in, he was already there. He stood up awkwardly, like he wasn't sure whether to hug me or not. I solved that for him. I just sat down and opened the menu. Like this was any other breakfast. We talked about safe things. First, work, residency, the weather in Seattle. He asked if I liked the people I worked with. I told him I did. Then quietly, he said, "I saw the photo you posted, the one from graduation." I looked up. "You looked peaceful." He said, "Happier than I've seen you in a long time." I nodded. I was hestered at the table for a moment. "I should have said something when your mom picked the wedding date. I knew it wasn't right." I didn't say anything. There wasn't a quick fix for years of silence. He looked up. I guess I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, but maybe that was just cowardice. That at least was honest. I studied his face, older than I remembered. Little softer around the eyes. He looked like a man who had swallowed too many words over the years. "I'm not angry with you," I said finally. "I just don't have the energy anymore to keep pretending things are fine when they're not." I understand. We finished breakfast quietly. He paid the bill, even though I reached for it. Old habits, I suppose. As we walked to the parking lot, he stopped beside my rental car. For what it's worth, he said, I think you've always been the strongest person in this family. I just wish we hadn't made you prove it alone. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but I didn't. I just said, thank you, and got in the car. I was about to head to the airport when I saw Desire's message again. I sat there for a long minute in the parking lot, hands on the steering wheel debating. Whether to respond, I didn't owe her anything, but something inside me. Maybe curiosity, maybe closure nudged me to reply me. I have 30 minutes if you're serious about not being dramatic. Meet me at Woodland Park by the tennis courts. She responded almost immediately. Jasmine on my way. 15 minutes later, she was walking across the grass in low heels, her hair done makeup light, but perfect, always prepared even for an ambush that wasn't coming. I sat on a bench beneath a tree that had just started blooming late spring. In Lexington has that brief window where everything feels gentler, green, warm, alive. She sat beside me, without a word at first, then said, I didn't expect you to agree, I almost didn't. She stared straight ahead. Look, I didn't come to defend what I did. I know how it looked. I know what it was. That's progress. I said not unkindly. I didn't pick the date just to spite you, she added. But I also didn't care enough not to. There it was. The truth had sat between us like a heavy stone, I guess. She continued. I thought it would always be about me. That's what it's always been. Right, you the brainy sister in the background? Me the one? Everyone notices. I said nothing. And when that flipped, even just for a second, I didn't know how to handle it. I looked at her. So you hampered the moment. Yeah, she admitted. Yeah, I did. We sat in silence. For a while, the breeze picked up. A dog barked somewhere across the field. You hurt me, Dee, I said. Finally. Not just that day. 4 years you made it a sport. She didn't deny it. She looked tired. I guess I thought being the favorite meant I had to compete to keep it, even if it meant kicking down a pause. I'm not here to beg you to forgive me, she said, but I don't want us to keep pretending we're strangers or enemies. I'd rather start over if you ever wanted that. I nodded, slowly. Maybe one day, but not today. That, too, was honest. She nodded back, stood and walked away this time. It wasn't bitter. Just what it was. I left Lexington that afternoon with no dramatic goodbyes, no confrontation at the airport, no last-minute scenes, just my small carry-on, a quiet heart, and a one-way ticket back to Seattle. It felt like leaving a chapter I'd read too many times, one where I already knew the ending, and it never satisfied me. But this time, I was the one putting the book down, back in Seattle. The rhythm of life resumed almost immediately. Morning rounds, clinic notes, long hours on my feet. It was exhausting, yes, but it was mine. There was something comforting about routine, especially after being surrounded by the emotional weight of family expectations for so long. One evening, about a week after returning, I came home to find a small box on my doorstep. No return label. Just my name handwritten. Inside was a photograph, me and Jasmine at my 8th grade science fair. She had her arms slung casually over my shoulders, both of us grinning into the camera. Underneath it was a card. I found this and thought, you might want it back for what it's worth. You did always win. Even if none of us said it at the time. I placed the photo in a drawer and left, the card tucked inside a book I hadn't finished. Maybe someday. I'd take it out again. Not today. Something strange happened. After that, I started hearing from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old classmates. A girl I used to know from undergrad who had since moved to Oregon and become a pediatric nurse. Even a former chemistry TA from my sophomore year emailed me out of the blue after seeing a piece I'd written for the hospital newsletter. Each message said the same thing in different ways. I remember how serious you were, how focused, and how people overlooked you. I'm glad they're seeing you. Now, I didn't reply to all of them, but I read every single one. Then one evening at the hospital, I was asked to give a talk to the incoming class of interns. Just a brief 10-minute introduction. They said a glimpse of what life looked like 1 year in. I stood at the front of the small auditorium coat slung over the back of a chair, a lukewarm coffee in one hand, and I looked out at a dozen young, exhausted faces who reminded me of a version of myself I had already outgrown. I told them the truth. That medicine will break you if you let it, that people will forget you're human, especially when you wear a white coat, that some of your worst days won't be about patients, but about colleagues' expectations and things that were said or never said by the people who raised you. But I said, looking around the room, you'll also become someone you respect, and that's worth more than any applause afterward. A young woman, maybe 23 or 24, stopped me in the hallway. "Thank you," she said. "I was beginning to think I didn't belong here. But what you said, it made me feel seen." I smiled. That's how you know you do. Belong here, it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but that was the moment I knew I had arrived fully, completely on my own terms. Sometimes, revenge doesn't look like the movies. It doesn't come in the form of dramatic comebacks or grand confrontations. Sometimes it's as quiet as peace, as subtle as self-respect, as powerful as walking into a room, knowing you don't need their approval anymore and realizing you never did. And when they look at you, surprised, unsettled, unsure of how you rose without them, that's the win. You don't have to say a word. You've already said everything that matters by becoming exactly who they never believed you could be. Weeks passed. Life returned to its steady, sometimes chaotic rhythm. But something inside me had shifted. There's a moment after you've pulled yourself out of years of needing to be seen by people who refuse to see you, when you realize you're no longer performing. You stop imagining your life as a counterpoint to theirs. You start living in a way that feels entirely your own. I stopped checking desires. Social media muted the family group chat months ago, but this time I actually left it. No announcement, just gone. That act, as small as it was, felt like an act of closure. No flames, no bridges burned, just walking away. What surprised me most, though, Washo. Many people stayed. People I'd met along the way, not bound by blood, but by something much stronger choice. There was Maya. Of course, she became more than a friend. She became my anchor in Seattle. She was the one who brought over groceries on the nights I was too tired to remember to eat, the one who knocked on my door with 2 cups of tea and zero judgment when I was having an off week. She never once asked for the messy family details. She just showed up over and over again. There was Dr. Torres, who sent me a book once every 2 weeks. Like clockwork, some serious, some ridiculous, some so beautiful. I cried on my bathroom floor halfway through. And Cosmo, my one-eyed cat, who had somehow decided I was his human and expressed that love by knocking over every glass of water I left on my nightstand that became my family. Late one Sunday evening, I found myself on my balcony wrapped in a thick blanket, listening to the rain tap gently against the windows. I was scrolling through photos on my phone. Some old, some new. When I stopped at one from that rooftop party on graduation night there, I was in my white coat laughing with my classmates. The city lit up behind us, my hair still curled from that morning ceremony. I zoomed in, not at myself, but at the people around me, how genuinely happy they looked. How full that moment had been. It didn't need to be shared with the people who couldn't celebrate it, because the right people were already. There I saved the photo to my favorites, and locked my phone the next morning. The hospital, I was paged. Unexpectedly, a new patient. Elderly woman was admitted overnight for dehydration and confusion. Her daughter had accompanied her. I walked into the room and froze for just a second. The daughter looked up. It was Taliami cousin. We hadn't spoken since her message after the gala. She smiled small and uncertain. "Hey, document." I smiled back, heart a little tight. "Hey." Her mother, my great-aunt. Esther's cousin, was sleeping. Alexa stood and pulled me aside. "I didn't know you worked here." She said they just brought us in last night. Mom was asking for you, though. Said she thought you lived out of state. I do, I said, but I'm here now, on rotation. She nodded, then added, You've really made something of yourself. I had to. I said no one else was going to do it for me. There was no defensiveness in here. Yes, just understanding. She looked down at her shoes, then back at me. I wish we'd stood up for you more. I gave a soft shrug. You didn't owe me that, but I appreciate you saying it. We spoke for a few more minutes. Nothing heavy. She left shortly after, and I stayed with the patient. But later, walking down the hall toward the nurse's station, I realized I wasn't angry. Not with Talia. Not anymore. There's a kind of healing that comes from being witnessed, even just for a second, by someone who once looked away. A few weeks later, I got a letter, not an email, not a message, an actual, handwritten letter, in an envelope with a return address in Lexington. The handwriting was unmistakable. My mother's. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. I didn't know what I was hoping for. Maybe nothing. Maybe something small. A sentence that didn't twist a truth. Even if it came late, I unfolded it. Slowly, expecting tension to rise in my chest, but instead I felt still solid. Rowan, I know I am probably the last person you want to hear from. I'm not writing to justify what I've said or done. I've spent my whole life thinking I was right, and I see now that all I really did was push you away. I saw strength in you and mistook it for rebellion. I saw independence and mistook it for rejection. You always made me nervous in a way, not because of who you were, but because of what I wasn't. And I suppose I tried to shape you into someone I could understand that wasn't fair. I won't ask you to forgive me. I don't deserve that on your timeline. I just want you to know, I've watched you from afar and I see, now, what I never said out loud. You are everything. I was too proud to acknowledge if you ever want to talk. I'm here. I'll respect your silence if that's your choice, Mom. I read it once, then again. It didn't erase the years. It didn't change the wedding or the years of being dismissed, overlooked, minimized. But it didn't need to. It was the kind of apology that didn't try to rewrite the past. Just sat in it. I didn't cry. Instead, I folded the letter and slid it into a drawer. Not to forget it, but to hold onto it for what it was. A rare moment of truth from someone who had spent a lifetime avoiding it. That weekend, I went hiking alone. There's a trail near Mount Si I'd been wanting to try. Quiet winding shaded with tall pines. The air smelled like moss and bark. And the further I walked, the more my thoughts untangled themselves. I thought about Jasmine, about the photo she sent. About the moment in the park when she asked for a chance to start over. I thought about my father sitting across from me. In that diner trying to make peace with decades of absence. In a single cup of coffee, I thought about Maya the way. Maya the way. She never flinched in the face of my messy, complicated grief. And I thought about myself, this version of me, with tired feet and a steady heart, finally not chasing validation from people who never learned how to give it. At the top of the ridge, I sat on a flat rock and looked out over the trees. The sky was wide and soft, like it had made room for him. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. Not my family, not my past, not even myself. Here's the thing. No one tells you about revenge. The best kind doesn't humiliate or destroy it, doesn't play out in public or get passed around in group chats. The best kind is becoming someone so whole, so rooted that the people who tried to diminish you no longer recognize the version of you they once knew. It's not loud. It's not cruel. It doesn't leave blood on the floor. It's quiet. It's calm. It's waking up in a life that you built. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself, right? And when you no longer need them to see it, that's when you've won. Sometimes, I forget how much has changed. It's not the big milestones that remind me, not the job title or the apartment, or the fact that I now teach med students who look at Methy way. I once looked at everyone else. It's the quiet moments, like walking home after a long shift and realizing I no longer rehearse imaginary conversations in my head with people I've outgrown, or sitting on my couch on a Sunday morning, coffee in hand, Cosmo curled up by the window and not feeling like I should be somewhere else, fighting for space at a family table that was never mine to begin with. Peace came slowly, not as a wave, but in inches. I never sent a reply to that letter. Maybe. I never will. Maybe just reading. It was enough. I don't carry anger with me anymore. Not because they deserve forgiveness, but because I deserve the freedom that comes with putting it down. Jasmine. And I haven't spoken again, not directly, but I've heard. She's doing fine. I hope she is truly. I hope she finds something real enough that she doesn't feel the need to compete with everyone else's happiness. As for me, well, I'm still figuring it out. But I like who I'm becoming, and I think that counts for more than anything I ever chased in that house. Every once in a while, someone asks about my family. I say, we're complicated, and leave it at that, because not everyone needs the full story. Only the part where I lived it and came out whole on my own terms.